Hello, and welcome to the latest Q&A in Screen International's For Your Consideration series. I'm America's editor, Jeremy Kay, and today I'm delighted to be joined by director Stanley Nelson and producer Traci A. Curry, whose film Attica is Oscar nominated for the Best Feature Documentary. Hello, Stanley. Hi, Traci.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Attica from Showtime documentary films is about the prison uprising at the Attica Correctional Facility in upstate New York that took place in September 1971, in which more than 1,200 prisoners took over the institution and took more than 30 hostages. They were demanding living conditions befitting human beings. After a tense period of negotiations, New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller sent in law enforcement to reclaim the prison. The result was the death of 29 inmates and 10 hostages. 50 years later, this horror story remains as relevant as ever in a United States where Black and brown people over-index in the prison population and calls for prison reform continue. Attica premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival in 2021 and opened in New York and Los Angeles last October prior to its debut on Showtime on November the 6th. Guys, I want to start by saying many congratulations on the Oscar nomination and the other accolades that this powerhouse documentary has earned, and much deserved. I'd like to start by asking you this. What were your recollections, or what you've heard from those close to you, of the actual uprising at the time, and how was it portrayed in US media at the time?
So I was alive at the time. I was maybe 19, 20 years old. So I have a memory of it. And you know, it was kind of a day-by-day thing. It took 5 days. The siege was 5 days. It was just a little bit of information trickling out at a time. We never really knew why the prisoners took over the prison and rebelled. We never knew why Rockefeller decided to go in with 500 members of law enforcement and retake the prison in a very violent way. So that we knew the outlines of it, and we knew, you know, that people were killed, but we didn't know why. We didn't know what the prisoners wanted. I thought that there was so much more to the story, and that the story said so much about prison, about class, about race, about so many things that we deal with in the United States, but also it kind of in what really is like a thriller, you know, day by day. We don't know what's going to happen from one day to the next. So I think that's what in many ways moved me to try to make a film about Attica.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So the way we see the film is the way, in a way, it was playing out in the media at the time. Information was trickling out. You didn't know what was happening, really.
Yeah, but we go into hopefully a lot more detail than the media went into at the time, and we go behind the scenes. So you see the negotiations. You see how the hostage, not only how the prisoners felt, but how the hostage families felt, and Rockefeller, and the fact that Nixon is in Rockefeller's ear, President Nixon, and telling Rockefeller what to do, and so that I think that we lift the veil off of so many things that were hidden before.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't mean to say that, and there you can see how it may have been a little obscure to observers at the time. Of course, we get the story through your film. Tell us about the interview process. I'm curious, you know, were some of the people who we see on screen willing to participate? Were others, did they take more persuasion? And perhaps were you unable to get certain people? Did they refuse? Some people refused to take part.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that there was an unwillingness. I will say that, you know, as you can imagine, this was a highly traumatic event for everyone that experienced it. And so initially in reaching out to people, people wanted to know, well, why are you wanting to tell the story? Why do you want to talk to me? And I spent a lot of time just kind of really getting to know the people in the film and letting them get to know us, being very clear with them about what Stanley and my intentions were for these stories that we were asking them to share with us. And what I found was that over time, people really wanted to talk about what happened. This was an injustice, and they never received any justice for what happened. And I think maybe wanting to talk about it allows at least some sense of recognition for what it is that they went through. And what we found is that eventually people had this very strong clarity of memory, but also this very strong presence of emotion, as though it had just happened yesterday. And so eventually, after having some of those kind of throat clearing, getting to know you conversations, what I found was that people were more than willing and very much wanted to talk about what had happened to them at Attica.
Yeah, as you say, those interviews are really raw. Emotions obviously running high, but was there anybody you tried to get on camera who refused to take part?
Our intention with the film was to tell a 360-degree story about all of the people who were touched by this. So obviously that includes the guards who were hostages, who I spoke with at length. Several of them we were prepared to shoot them. They had agreed to be in the film. And then shortly before we were supposed to shoot, they all sort of collectively changed their mind and decided not to be in the film.
I see. Okay. What about the authorities when you were telling the story? Was there any pushback or any pushback from the authorities?
No, there was no pushback at all, Traci. I don't think. I mean, you know, we're a documentary film crews, and so we're not, you know, we're not publicizing what we're doing in you know the daily papers or putting out press releases in that way. I mean, so you know, we were very much under the radar, but I don't think that you know, and we were talking about something that happened 50 years ago. So I don't think that there was much any pushback for us, and I don't think there would have been even if people knew what we were doing. You know, yeah.
Stanley, what were some of the what would you say were some of the most memorable things you learned in making this, and to you, Traci, some of the things that still stand out in your minds that perhaps you didn't know or didn't know to that extent?
I mean, I think that's a hard question because, you know, I learned so much. I think one is that the humanity of the former prisoners just, you know, pops through the film, and that's one of the things that's so striking about the film, and that, you know, we don't have to put an arrow, you know, like look at this guy. He's human, but that we see them. You know, one is funny, one is very serious, one is you know, crying and physically upset. You know, that we see those people. I think, you know, also we knew that there was some footage that existed, but we had no idea the extent of the footage that existed, and that the footage would help us to really tell this story and make you feel it, because you see them going in with guns blazing. You know, you see the you know, them laughing, the law enforcement outside the prison after, you know, the 39 people are killed, laughing and joking and yelling white power. You see that. You see the prisoners crawling through the latrines and the mud that they have dug it, and the conversations, the phone conversations that we have, and we have, you know, audio conversations between Nixon and Rockefeller are just, you know, incredible and haunting. So I think that, you know, so much was surprised us, and you know, we, even when we knew the outlines of the story, once we went in, the interviews and the footage, you know, and the pictures made it just so much deeper than we ever thought, you know, we could tell the story, just because that all that material is so incredible.
Sounds like the footage was quite a breakthrough. What was the source for that? Where did you find that?
Traci?
Yeah, the footage kind of the source of it kind of falls into three buckets, more or less. There's the material that you see inside DR during the rebellion and outside of the prison, because the prisoners had the temerity to recognize in this moment an opportunity to tell their story in their own words. They invited the media into the prison. So all of that stuff was filmed by the networks. It was on the news every night during those 5 days. And so we knew that the networks had that material. We had a fabulous archival producer, Rosemary Rotundi, and it really was just kind of being very persistent, going to the networks, digging to get as much of that material from them as we could. Then there's the black and white sort of grainy footage that you see being captured from the catwalks over DR during the rebellion and also during the retaking with the helicopters and the smoke. That material was actually filmed by New York State troopers who were on the scene for the duration of the rebellion, and that material is held by the New York State Archives, and so we were able to access that. And then there are those harrowing photos that you see of the aftermath after the shooting. The 13th, the men being marched nude around the yard, the bodies, all of that. Those photos were actually evidence. As you see during the credits, there were decades of lawsuits against the police, against the state of New York. They were led by a team of lawyers who worked pro bono all of that time. And the leader of that team was a woman named Liz Fink, who has since passed away. But she has all of that evidence gathered in an archive. And fortunately, we were able to gather together that archive. And it was, I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of documents, photos, and pieces of information that we went through. And so that's where we found that material.
I thought one of the many things that was so fascinating and chilling about your film was also how there was a part when there were reports, misinformation about how the inmates were treating their hostages, which patently was not true. And yet that spreads, and we see that happening today all the time. That was such a chilling insight into just the way people behave and misinformation spreads. Was that something that you were very keen to highlight from the beginning, or was that another sort of discovery in your research process?
I'll let Traci talk about that, but we knew from the very beginning that the first reports that came out were that the inmates had killed hostages. There was a process of actually finding the footage where they two different newscasters announced that, national newscasters, on the nightly news, and so that cemented it, and that we had that material. But Traci, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I really think it speaks to kind of the perils of access journalism that we see today, where at the prison at that time, there was one voice who was a prison official, who was the voice of the prison. And that was the sole source that major networks and major newspaper outlets relied upon to tell the story about what happened. And of course, that was false, because as we saw with the call with Nixon and Rockefeller, the state and the government was trying to craft a story that took responsibility off of the state and put it onto the prisoners. And so saying that the prisoners had killed all of these hostages, when of course they were killed by gunfire and none of the prisoners had guns, was part of crafting that narrative. And although it was corrected the next day when the coroner came out and said, listen, all of these people were killed by guns, because it was sort of the first story, it kind of was the stickiest. And so it's why even to this day, there are a lot of people who still believe that the prisoners killed all of those hostages, because that's what's reported in major, the New York Times reported this, right? In major media outlets. And I'll say that one exception was John Johnson, who you see in the film, who told us, I didn't see it, so I didn't report it. But for the most part, that was the narrative that came out of the 13th, that the prisoners had killed all of the people that they took hostage, when of course they went through great pains to make sure the hostages were actually taken care of.
Yeah, I think one of the things that happens, is as we tell people that we made a film about Attica, we're telling people that we're making a film about Attica, at a party or somebody you see on the street, they say, oh yeah, wasn't that where the prisoners killed all those guys? I mean, that is really what has come down in history, because that was the first report that came out.
Yeah, and then on the other side of the coin, I'm just interested how much was known about the horrific, not just the response in terms of the killings, but the way in which the authorities demeaned the prisoners and made them crawl through latrines and just awfully demeaning behavior. Was that something that was known at that time, or did it emerge later?
No, I mean, that as I remember, being alive at that time, that was something that was not talked about at all. I mean, it was that people were killed, but the whole torture that happened afterwards, that happened for no good reason, as the former prisoners in the film are so clear about. They had retaken the prison. It was done. They had retaken it, and then the real, after the murders, then the torture started, and it was not known at all at that time.
Well, and then you referred to this, of course, at the end of the film, but just for the benefit of viewers of this interview, just tell us what happened at the end of those lengthy lawsuits that ensued after the uprising, and what happened in terms of recompense to all involved.
Yeah, so of course, as I said, there was no justice for any of these people. No member of law enforcement was ever prosecuted or made to be accountable for what happened, nor, by the way, was the governor of the state of New York, who of course goes on to become vice president of the United States after this. But there were essentially 30 years of litigation of these lawyers, as I said, fighting pro bono to get justice for the prisoners. And eventually in the year 2000, they won a settlement for the state of New York. The families, however, whose loved ones were killed by the state, because they signed their workman's comp checks in the aftermath of their loved ones' deaths. And by the way, the state rushed to get these women, these widows, to sign these checks, some of them the days of the funeral. What they did not know was that by signing those checks, they forfeited their right, any right, to sue the state of New York for damages. And so what happened was, when the prisoners finally got their settlement in the year 2000, the families organized to essentially shame the state of New York into also giving them a settlement. And that's how the families were able to get the money. But this is 30 years after the fact. And there's never been an apology for the state of New York for any of these people, ever.
I see, right. Well, it's fascinating and horrifying at the same time. What do you hope people will take away from this film?
I mean, I think that when we made the film, we weren't thinking of any one thing. It wasn't like we made this film to do this. But I think that hopefully, at the very least, people will think about the fact that there's 2 million people, over 2 million people in prison in the United States. There's nothing has ever existed like the prison system in the United States, and we put more and more people in prison. There's the one line that I love, where at the first night they're in the yard and they're outside free, and there's a prisoner who's walking around looking up at the sky, and he says, this is the first time I've been out at night in 22 years. And it's just one line, but it makes you really think about the fact that people are in prisons for unbelievable amount of time, and that it's really cruel and unusual punishment. So I hope that at the very least the film makes people think about the prison system, and hopefully people can start pushing for change.
And it sounds like you're quite hopeful, are you? Do you think effective, meaningful change can happen?
Yeah, I mean, it can happen, and I think that it will happen at some point. It's not that I'm encouraged by anything that's happening, really, that, oh yeah, prisons are going to change, but I think it's a slow process. Prisons have worked this way for kind of hundreds and hundreds of years, lock people up and throw away the key and don't have to think about them. But I think that one of the reasons why our film is being received in the way it is that, the door is kind of cracked open, with the death of George Floyd and so many others, and the protest to the fact that there is a problem with law enforcement and the prison system in this country. And hopefully people will continue to think about it and move for change.
Absolutely. Traci, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what I hope is that the film is an invitation for people in the United States to be curious about the system that we have. It occurred to me not too long ago that while most people will never have been in a prison or know what a prison is, most Americans probably think they do because prisons are so prevalent in fictional representations in the media, in film and television. But it's not a reflection of the system as it actually exists. And so I feel like if we are willing to allow this system in our name as a public, if we're told that this is what is necessary, this system that jails more people than any other country on the planet, then we should be really clear-eyed about what the system really is, whether it actually is functioning in the way that we're told, whether we're safer because of this, whether it's worth the sort of violence and the dehumanizing of people, the robbing people of their citizenship that the system perpetrates against each other. And so I really hope that the film is an invitation for people to be curious and clear-eyed about the system we have, and like ask some of those tough questions about whether we're willing to allow it in the name of protecting the public and keeping us safe. And if in fact that is actually what it does, or if it does violence and injustice to people who are in the system instead.
Yeah, and just before we sign off, I just wanted to ask you two just the fact-based questions. Roughly, how long did it take you to make Attica?
Probably about three years or so. We were a little bit slowed down by the coronavirus, but probably about 3 years.
Okay, and what of Attica itself? The institution is it still open and operational?
Oh yes. Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
Attica. So what's interesting is that one of the demands that the prisoners were making in 1971 was that guards be prosecuted for those who did violence or harmed prisoners. That did not happen for the first time until 2014, when 3 guards nearly beat a man to death, a prisoner, and they were prosecuted. And as a result of that, there were cameras installed inside Attica. So there's about 2,000 cameras inside the prison as of, I believe, 2017. But yes, it's very much still open, functioning prison with many of the same issues and challenges that existed 50 years ago.
Yeah, well, this has been a fascinating talk, and hearing what you've done. And it's, as I say, it's a powerhouse movie. Many congratulations to both of you for the accolades, and it's a very provocative piece that we need to really pay attention to. Thank you. Thank you so much, Stanley Nelson. And Traci A. Curry, and also to all our viewers who are tuning in. Thank you for your time. This was a Screen International For Your Consideration Q&A. If you would like to see more in this series, please visit screendaily.com/FYC-screenings. And that's all from us today. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you.